Yitzi Tuvel, how are you?
Hi. Yeah, thank God. Very well. Very well. How you doing, Serene?
I'm doing well too. I love how you say thank God. It's refreshing. And another thing that I love that you say is whenever there's an event happening in the future, like I'll say I'll see you soon, and you always say God willing.
Mm.
It's I like it because we don't really know what will happen in the future, and almost making promises about the future seems somewhat dishonest. And saying God willing, I'll see you soon sounds like the most honest way to live a life, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it gets you around. It gets you around the possibility that you're going to say something false, which is a bad thing. But also, it does that without while also allowing you to slip in a reassertion of your intention that it will go that way, and also a little prayer. So that's a bit of a trifecta.
Mm. A
Like if
reassertion.
someone, yeah, like if someone says, will it, what, are you going to come to the party? And you're like, I don't know. I mean, that's true, but it also sounds like you're trying to get out of it a bit. If you're like, God willing, then you're like, I would like to, but the future is not a place that I have dominion over.
Mm. So you're kind of introduce you. You're a friend of mine, first of all, and an Orthodox Jew, and you have your own podcast,
Mm-hmm.
Building Jerusalem with Yitzi Tuvel. There's two of
Yeah.
them, but yours is the one with Yitzi Tuvel.
Yes.
And to me, I wanted to get you on because you represent something like the next wave of religion to me, and I know that's putting a lot on your shoulders, but I kind of see a lot of people dropping out of religion, which is a real shame. And the way you speak of it and interpret it, I think, gives value to it to even an atheist. And I'm very interested by whenever you bring up religion, it's incredibly fascinating to me. So I thought I would have you on the podcast and talk about it.
Sure. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
I'm on it.
Oh, thank you. But first, maybe we'll talk about your podcast first. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Like what is it? What was your intention with it, and what kind of people did you interview?
Well, the intention going in, I guess, was pretty broad. Um, I suffer from something that I guess a lot of people with a creative spirit of one kind or another suffer from, which is a perennial dearth of output. And I figured that I could force myself to meet up with interesting people and have conversations with them, and that would be a good thing. And I think often you get some pretty good ideas coming out of conversations. So at least there'd be some record, and that would be a good start. And I think that when you have a podcast, you get to have long conversations with people that you want to have long conversations with, you otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah.
And that in itself is extremely edifying.
Oh, absolutely. You can it's definitely a great place to arrange a meeting with somebody who you have no other reason to, or they have no other reason to talk to you, is the best way to say that. I mean, in the past I interviewed, like, I used to have this podcast that I actually took down, but I interviewed astronomers and mycologists and psychologists and also all sorts of really fascinating people. And
I'm trying to figure out the theme. You're making sure that the mushrooms you send into space are mentally healthy.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Mushrooms
That's
are
important.
the key to life. And so you need, if you're colonizing other planets, they need to have good mental health. We
And if
don't
the
want another
mushrooms are having a bad
humanity.
trip. Hey, I think we're on the we're in the top 30th percentile, top 30. Probably the top third of civilizations. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have our stuff, but could be a
I
lot
think
worse.
dogs are first.
Oh, if we're counting, I don't know, I was just thinking sentient species, but if we're counting like animals of Earth, yeah, dogs are pretty good. I think like dogs are possibly the only creature that's been like rigorously bred to be pro-social over like thousands of years. So yeah, big surprise, and it works.
I wish I remember the name. My friend's a doctor, and there's this disease that people can get, and it's a genetic disease, and it's a disease that makes you um mentally disabled but incredibly happy all the time. And one time she said that people suspect that dogs have that people bred that disease into dogs. So they're not as smart as wolves, but they're incredibly happy all the time, always amazingly happy to see you, which is strange. But
That's
also,
really interesting.
mm,
I feel like, especially, with once you so something that really became clear from studying psychology is that a lot of the things that we put in as called by ontological names, we're like, oh well, this such and such disorder or what have you. It's not like it's a real thing. It's just like there's a series of mental traits that tend to cluster together, and if you have 6 of these 10 bullet points, then you've got it. And so just like the idea that it's the exact same disorder, yeah, maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but the idea that the same cluster of mental traits would function collectively would have been independently bred into dogs. I think that's very reasonable. It's entirely possible.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think maybe we have this culture of psychology of kind of basing all of our ideas on like DSM, which is flawed in so many ways. But I suppose like when you get a cut, you have a cut and you can categorize it as a cut. It's definitely not a burn, for instance. And they're very two separate things. But with mental illness, it's like we can't quite categorize the brain. You can't slice it up like pizza and just say this is what this section is. Like this is bipolar and this is ADHD. And I think we try to do that. I think people, well, Adam named the animals. Like people like to name things and categorize them and put them into boxes. And so it's easy to get, I think it's also easy to get stuck into a diagnosis if we have one.
Yeah, also true. I want to see if I can remember this guy. I studied behavioral science for a little bit with Yitzhak Aaron at goes by Gingy at Hebrew University, and he used to say, and he put me onto this piece by I think the guy's name was P.W. Anderson. So in the 70s, he wrote this paper called "More is Different." I might have some of the details around here. And basically what he was saying is, in principle, if all you know is the rules of, I think, like a certain subset of quantum physics, then you can do all of chemistry with that. You don't need to know anything else. You can just brute force chemistry. But practically speaking, there are insights in chemistry that you only really get from doing chemistry and that you actually can't derive from first principles. You could, prove them backwards. I guess it's like a bit P equals NP. You can sort of demonstrate how it works with the quantum model, but you can't actually figure it out if you start from that baseline. And I think that, that goes up on a whole lot of levels of analysis. And one of the levels is that, yeah, we're really good at making these structural models of the brain and saying, well, this is the hippocampus and this is the thalamus. And that's fantastic. But then you're like, okay, so I was talking to my friend the other day, I was trying to illustrate how little we actually get of the jump from neurology, from neuroscience up to psychology. I said, okay, so what does, what takes care of memory? And he's like, oh, well, the hippocampus and the thalamus, and just lists like 4 of them, 5 of them. And I'm like, yeah, great. Which part does what? No one knows. But like, it seems like these things turn on when that thing happens.
Yeah.
It's like what we have is the red light, and we're trying to figure out microphones from that.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. I mean, the brain's so complicated. When people say, I got very interested in neuroscience for a while, and it's just enough to realize that nobody really knows what they're talking about. And even if they understand like a very specific specialty about what pathways operate where, they still know very little. Like, so whenever you hear someone saying dopamine is responsible for X, for goal setting or whatever, it's like, that's absolutely far too simplified. And just saying that kind of indicates not how little you know. I mean, that sounds quite grandiose, but it's like, I mean, there are, I think, 5 different types of dopamine, and they're in 2 categories, and they operate with in tandem with like dozens or hundreds of other neurotransmitters that are all operating and kind of keeping balances, and then there are the glial cells that kind of feed them and make sure the environment is correct. And it's just so overly complicated that we have very little idea of how it works still.
Apparently the glial cells are more responsible for stuff than we previously thought too. That's just coming out. They're not just like glorified wiring, like wire cleaners or cooling down systems. They're actually involved. I mean, look, it's like you're on like a forum chatting about like the difference between Excel and Google Documents, like spreadsheet programs. Someone's like, yeah, really, it's about electricity. Like electricity is what makes these programs work.
I don't understand quite what you mean by that. Oh, I guess.
Like, the chemical involved. You don't know you're not even talking about the process. The process is an entirely different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. But I suppose we need simplicity to live, to kind of understand life.
Sure. We do need simplicity to live, but we've got it's you don't want to pretend that your simplified functional map is in fact the territory.
Yeah.
That's all.
We get confused there. Which actually kind of brings me to religion a little bit, because
okay, you brought it up this time, not me.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. I brought you on to mostly talk about it. I'm sure we'll talk about other things too, but you're very entertaining no matter what. But in terms of, I mean, there's this thing that is bothering me of, okay, so to give a brief introduction of me, I'm planning on converting to Judaism at some point, to modern Orthodox Judaism. And so I'm kind of in this sort of space where I'm looking at it fairly critically and also looking at the positive points, and then kind of forming my own view, because I'm planning on it, but I think one should go into something really understanding it as well as one can, although I don't know if anyone really understands Judaism. But I see these, I'm kind of making these decisions by myself, like trying not to interpret the map as the territory, as they say. Like, so for instance, every time I decide not to do something that Judaism commands, there's a saying of, don't take down a fence until you know what it's hiding, or until you know what it's keeping back. And so it's like, every time I decide to wear clothing that goes past my elbows, that is revealing or something, like I could say, well, that's an old time principle and things used to be different back then, but do I really know what the effects of that are? I suppose I see religion as kind of from kind of an evolutionary lens in a lot of ways, as in the religions that succeeded were the ones that gave people rules to live by, and the people who had good rules to live by survived and thrived. And one of the reasons why I really like Judaism is that the culture is excellent. I mean, the people seem to be very well educated and very they have great communities. And so the principles must themselves be good. And so it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it's something that comes up from what, I mean, you're covering a lot of ground there, but something that springs to mind is one measure of how good a community is what does it do with its extra resources? And I think it's sort of a bit trite to say that we're living in a consumerist society. Okay, we're consumer. What does that mean? It means you want to try and make the maximum surplus income and then spend it on showy things. Maybe, well, that's part of what it means, at least. But the idea is that like different times and places and cultures, you have different things that qualify as showy things. So my friend Salvatore recently came back from it's been a couple of years now, came back from his sabbatical in Rome, and he said that there was this period in time in Rome where if a rich guy wanted to like do something fancy, he'd build a church in Rome. That was the thing to do. And they wouldn't like build churches in Madrid or Valencia or whatever. They built it in Rome, and Rome had way too many churches already, and that's just what they did. And so now if you go to Rome, it's just incredible. Like you could turn down a random side street and find a church that no one that no one knows anything about, that has no one in it, that's just completely unremarkable by Roman standards, but would be in like the top 3 churches on a different continent. It's just mind-boggling. So that's right. So that's like, that's what happens, right? So like if you say like step 1 is the Ferrari, right, and then step 2 is like building churches in Rome, what's step 3, what's step 4? What ways of people spending their extra resources to indicate, I don't know, mate fitness or what have you, could be better than that. And one thing I really, really like is this idea that especially on high holidays, the big honors of the services will be auctioned off. So it's like the person who gets to open the ark before the Torah on like Yom Kippur for a certain prayer, like that honor will be auctioned. People will bid on it. Someone will win the bid, and then give like whatever's bid. He'll give that as a donation to the synagogue for the running of the synagogue and its altruistic purposes. And then as well as that, he'll usually then give the honor to someone else as a way of honoring that person. So he won't even open the thing. And I think that's just such a stunningly good way to process extra resources. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I love seeing that too. That's a good point of taking things like the need to advertise mate selectability. I don't know what that is. I don't know exactly to say it, to show off how great of a man you are, and then channel it towards a very wholesome avenue. I mean, that's excellent. I think another one of my favorite examples of that is Boyan Slat. He has the ocean cleanup project, and they clean up. I don't know if you know about this, but they have these giant barges, and plastic floats into them, and they just clean up the ocean. It's immaculate. It's incredible. And he makes these glasses out of the recycled plastic, and I think they cost like $300, and it's amazing because people want to show off how environmental they are. And so he gives them this opportunity to donate $300 to this amazing cause, and then they get to wear these glasses that just say, I'm an environmentalist. That's a very high status move in their community. And it's somewhat different. It's I guess pledging money towards God. I don't want to compare it towards but
it's kind of, I mean, where the rubber hits the road is in the charitable programs in the end anyway. Like what is it? There's this line at the end of Tana de Belias. There's something like the Holy One, blessed be he says, what is it I lack that I need of you? And what then do I ask of you? Only that you be kind to one another and revere one another and love one another. And like that's where the rubber hits the road. So I mean, yeah, like doing right by other people is may well be the holiest thing that can be done. Yeah. I mean that in like not just in like the commonplace saying of it, but like doctrinally that seems to be the case.
Oh, absolutely. I had this conversation with someone not too long ago where he talked about serving God. He talked about serving God through giving to charity. And from the Jewish point of view, God is everything and everyone. And so if God is in the beggar, then by serving the beggar, you are literally serving God, but also serving God's will as well.
Yeah, I there was an email going around recently ahead of Halloween about I think it was Robert Ingram sent it out about like how Halloween is like a very non-Jewish festival. He was saying, I think it's more un-Jewish than Christmas, And everyone's like, and when I say this, people are like, what do you mean? Nothing could be more un-Jewish than Christmas, because Christmas is literally another religion's thing. He's like, yeah,
Jesus
well,
was a Jew. I don't know.
right, there you go. He doesn't go that
He's a
angle.
Jew.
He doesn't go that angle. His angle is two parts. One is, well, in the actual festival itself is like a pagan holiday, sure. Like everything has pagan roots. But then the second part of it is, at least Christmas has a spirit of giving to it. Halloween, the spirit is you show up at people's houses and you like essentially blackmail them into giving you candy.
Yeah.
He's like, no, that's not what we do. And we were talking about this. Give me a moment here. We were actually talking about this the other day at the Halloween party.
Yep.
About liminality and how like cultures independently derive these festivals where people dress up and everything's reversed. And so lahavdil, the Jewish one is Purim, right? And the slogan is v'nahafachu, and it is flipped over, and that's like the sort of motif of the story of Esther altogether. But also it's like the festival itself and the masks and the dressing up and the subversion of normal power structures and whatever. And Rabbi Ingram points out that, well, what we do on our liminal dress up day is we go around and give food to our friends and give gifts to the poor. Like those are two of like the 4 mandatory mitzvahs of the day, along with feasting and hearing the Megillah.
And getting so it's enacted out as getting so drunk that you can't tell your left hand is from your right, but there's also a different way of interpreting it, I believe.
Yeah, the getting so drunk that you can't tell the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman.
Can you tell people what Purim is? Because there might be some non-Jews listening, and before I was introduced to Judaism, I knew absolutely nothing about it. I knew Hanukkah, and that's about all. So I don't think many people know what Purim is.
Yeah, so Hanukkah gets a higher profile because of its presence in late December.
Yeah.
But Purim is a roughly an equivalent festival. Purim and Hanukkah are like sort of the 2 big rabbinic festivals. So they're festivals based on things that happened like after the Bible was already written and codified, and that's after that. So the Purim story is the story of the central story is that there was a king in Persia. This was after the Jews had been expelled from Israel by the Babylonians, and then the Persians had defeated the Babylonians. So the Persians sort of inherited the Jews as part of their empire, but hadn't actually conquered them. So there's this interesting sort of tension of the Persians being seen as at once imperial occupiers but also saviors, and that's a really interesting line to pursue. Little pop quiz there is as far as I know, there's only one person who's actually referred to as Mashiach in Tanakh, and I'll leave it to you to try and figure out who that is. But anyway, the point is that the Persians give the Persian king throws a feast celebrating his big empire. He commands his wife to come and dance for the people before, or like to display with her regal crown or something. She refuses, and this is like a crisis of government. And he ends up sending her away and running a beauty pageant essentially to find his new queen. And there's this one girl, Esther, who's a Jewish girl, the niece or cousin or something of Mordechai, who's like the sort of leading figure of the time, and she ends up getting drawn into this process unwillingly, but she's selected by the king and becomes the queen, and she's told like just hide the fact that you're Jewish, don't tell anyone, and she hides it and hides it, and eventually like there's this many details, but there's a massive crisis of near genocide essentially. The Jews are about to be wiped out, and at this crucial climactic moment she reveals that she's Jewish, and that this genocidal effort is aimed against her and her people. And then the king's furious and, has the conspirators who previously enjoyed his favor destroyed, wiped out. And so we're in this brilliant reversal. This the concealment becomes revealed and saves everyone. And so the idea and the chief conspirator is hanged on a gallows that he himself prepared for Mordecai the Jew, for the head of the Jews. And so that reversal is sort of the culminating reversal in a series of flips throughout the story. And so the theme of the day is reversal and concealment, right? In the same way that the queen hid her Jewishness, and her name Esther is related to nistar, concealment, and the name of God doesn't appear in the text, so he's also concealed. Yeah, it's very interesting. There's only one openly religious thing that I can see in the entire text. Only one.
What is it?
It's that at the moment where Mordecai tells Esther, you've got to go and intercede with the queen, she says, I can't. The rule is that if anyone goes before the king, even his queen, without being summoned, that person is liable for death. And you essentially need a royal pardon to make it out of that situation. And I'm not guaranteed a one, but I'll tell you what, the king hasn't sent for me in a while, so if we just lay low for a few days, will probably send for me, and then I can, do the bit and try the interceding. And Mordecai says something like, it's this is on you at the moment. You've got to do it now. And if you hide, then God will surely send some other rescuer, but you and your father's house will vanish, something like that. Yeah. And so she says, fine, I'll do it, but make everyone get everyone, all the Jews, to fast for 3 days first. I'm going to fast. My maids are going to fast. Get all the Jews to fast. So everyone fasts for 3 days before she goes to the king. And that's as far as I can tell, it's the only openly religious thing that happens in the whole text.
Why would they fast?
Well, the fasting is a traditional method for invoking divine favor.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then so now on Purim, children dress up in the daytime, and part of the Torah is read out, and then you can please tell us what happens in a traditional Purim festival.
Yeah, well, I mean, a minor correction there. It's not part of the Torah. It is part of the Tanakh. It's the story of Esther, one of the later writings. Yeah.
The Torah is the 5 books. That's right. Sorry.
Correct. So, but it is part of the Tanakh. It's read out, the book of Esther, in the night and the day, and people feast. And as you say, the kids dress up, as well as some of the more courageous and playful of the adults. And we give gifts to each other. We roll around in each other's houses and give gifts, which, like everything, have a set of rules attached to them. The main rule being that it has to be 2 separate food items, 2 different food items. You can't just give someone a can of Coke. It has to be a can of Coke plus an apple, something like that. 2 different things. And we give donations to the poor. And there's the 4 commandments of the day. But it also occupies this place of the liminal transitional day, the day that subverts the normal pattern of things.
And people get really, really drunk that night.
Really drunk, yeah.
And I wonder how that works. I wonder, maybe if I seem to kind of see religion from we talked about this before, but kind of from a 3-dimensional point of view, and instead of living in it, as I hope to do in the future, I kind of see it for, perhaps it's more like it's evolutionary reasons, or why it ends up being good. What is the positive, what positivity can we derive from this act? And so I wonder if perhaps getting really drunk with your community is a way to form bonds with other people, or but as you said, it's also kind of flipping the tables. It's kind of acting a fool for the night, in a way that many cultures do.
Yeah. So look, drinking and bonding through drink is is a broader thing. We obviously we sanctify wine traditionally on Saturday night and Friday night and Saturday daytime, and at the festivals, like this wine is a mainstay, not to
It's a
this
glass.
extent.
It's a
Right.
small amount of wine.
That's true. But also, it seems okay. So you're right. So there's two more like things that I suppose can be said on that. One is that at least from the Talmud, it's very clear that there was a lot of wine being drunk. I think that might be because wine keeps. I think it's the same reason that sailors traditionally drink rum. It's that wine keeps and doesn't get infested, but water gets infested. And so when you don't have storage methods, wine is safer than water. There's somewhere, I'm trying to remember, I think in Masechet Shabbos somewhere it says something like it's comparing, it's trying to figure out if you bless Shabbos first or the wine first. Do you make the Geffen blessing or the blessing over Shabbos first? And one of the arguments there is, well, Shabbos is rare, but drinking is common. And so, that gives you some sense of how often these people were ingesting wine. And then the other side of that coin, so that's the Talmudic side. And then, the modern Hasidic side, of course, is that within Hasidic communities, the idea of the Farbrengen, the coming together and sharing stories and speaking deeply from the soul and to the soul and having quite a bit of alcohol. That's part of the fraternity, fraternity activities, let's say. Like it's quite common. If you go to the right shul, if you go to the right house of prayer, you'll get quite a bit of alcohol. Excuse me. You'll get quite a bit of alcohol. There you go. Quite a bit of alcohol on most weeks. So it's not just Purim, but Purim is the big one. I think Purim is the only one where you're like really commanded to get very, very drunk. And people would argue about how commanded you really are, but the central, it seems to be that you're commanded to get really drunk. And to me, that seems more powerful than mere bonding. I think it's really supposed to be a periodic reset, in the same way that Shabbos is a periodic reset from labors, and sleep is a periodic reset from normal waking consciousness. And the calendar has many levels of analysis, bigger and smaller levels. The laws of family purity, niddah laws, are supposed to be a monthly reset in the same way. So that's these levels of reset exist at various levels, and Purim, I think, is the big destruction and reconstitution of your societal models, but also like your model of who you are. It's like you're wearing a mask today. Have you been wearing a mask all year? Maybe get really, really drunk and think about it. I don't know. Maybe these are elements there.
Yeah, Judaism has the laws of family purity. I just want to, in case people are listening to this who aren't Jewish, it's you can't touch if you're married to someone, you can't touch them while the woman is on her period and about a week after. Is that correct? And so that's probably great for having babies at the proper time. And then Shabbos is when I first was introduced to Judaism, I realized, or Shabbat, how good of an idea that is. I had no idea before, but it's really kind of the foundation of the Jewish community in many ways, I would say. You can't work at all, which is lovely. It's really, really nice to not work for a whole day and be commanded to not work on top of that.
You're not even allowed to feel guilty about not working.
Yeah, which is
actual relaxation.
Yeah, it's amazing. Because I think I come from this very American culture in a way of just, we have this modern idea of like hustle culture. Like you listen to Gary Vee and he's like, never stop working. Like learn to lucid dream so you can work while you sleep. Like just crazy stuff. And in Jewish culture, it's actually like, oh no, you have to rest one day a week. It's mandatory. And on top of that, you can't drive, you can't cook, many things. You can't write or play music and watch TV. I mean, there's so much there, but I think one of the major parts of it is that you you can't drive to synagogue. And if you go to synagogue, you have to walk. And that makes it so you live within a few kilometers of your neighbors, all of your family, probably of your whole neighborhood. And the community is excellent. It's amazing to kind of, it just the fact that nowadays I live in this area and I walk down the street and I see so many people that I know. Like I go to the supermarket, I see people that I know, and it's like, I think of Beauty and the Beast or something, like that quaint town where everyone knew each other, and that's kind of what Judaism has brought into the modern world in so many ways. I think I felt nostalgic for something like that for something that I've never had really until I got here. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I remember a great tweet I saw about this recently that was like, here comes the baker with his bread like always. Oh yeah, and here comes Belle with her daily mean song about us.
Oh man.
Yeah. But it has that enchanted quality. You know, I wrote a piece for the university newspaper writing competition a few years ago, specifically pressing that angle. That I'd functionally, despite growing up in I guess the most metropolitan of the cities in Australia, sorry Melbourne, I did at the same time grow up in like a little village. It's very visceral. It's very concrete.
Are you still at university?
No.
No, yeah.
Otherwise, I'd still be entering those competitions, I think. And I think I'd still be writing for the newspaper. If you get a chance, whoever's listening to this, if you're at university and your university has a newspaper, do yourself a favor, go become a writer for your university newspaper. And then go ask people to give you interviews and to give you free tickets to things. There you go.
Okay. Yeah. Free tickets. I like
it. Yeah. I got like best seats in the house, free tickets to the opera house to see, I think, Verdi's Rigoletto.
Wow.
It's crazy. It's crazy what people will throw at student writers for student newspapers. You just gotta message the publicity person and say, I write for the newspaper. Can I have free tickets to this thing? Opens doors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start doing podcasts that require free tickets.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd be as lucky with that. You don't have an institution backing you. Yeah.
Okay.
The thing as well is that there's this sort of like chain of institutional weight there. So it's like the University of Sydney is this big prestigious thing, and then like within that you have the university newspaper, which isn't really run by the newspaper. It's run by like sort of the union. So you've got like university, and you've got the union, and the union has this newspaper, and the university has, and the newspaper has this team, and there's someone on there who can say, yeah, one of the editors would be like, yeah, or a team of the editors would be like, yeah, okay, you can write for us. And then you're sort of this whole domino goes back out. So the key thing that the person reads when you send the email is the University of Sydney. Like, wow, University of Sydney. But there's so many points of leverage up and down it that all you really need to do is be vaguely good with a pen, and just willing to put out a bit of content.
Wow! And the tip of that pyramid is just some students getting drunk on the weekends and procrastinating on a piece that they have to write tomorrow. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I think a lot of I think the tips of a lot of pyramids are like that. I mean, I recently I saw Hamilton this week for the first time on Disney Plus.
I loved it.
Not live, yeah. I'm hoping to go live, but I was told that you've got to see it with subtitles first. You know the lyrics, otherwise there'll be too much going on. You won't follow. Did you see it in the theater?
I saw it live right before we got locked down. It was.
Oh, well done. Yeah. Was that your first time seeing it?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you find it tricky to follow the lyrics?
No.
No. They must have good enunciation at this production here then.
Yeah, it was excellent. It made me more of a patriot. I wanted to read the Constitution. I still do. Goal now of understanding the founding fathers better.
Yeah. Have you seen this is a bit more obscure. Have you seen 1776, the musical?
No.
So that's this done 30, 40 years ago, and it's a lot more. I mean, it has its comedic aspects, but in some sense, it's a more serious piece. But I was so impressed with how well that musical did turned the proceedings of the Second Continental Congress into, an entertaining musical romp, and then, but at the same time, that tells the story of sort of the main players, the inner guard, the Jefferson and Franklin and Adams and those people, and I really liked how Hamilton told the story of like the sort of second ring, the people who are slightly outside and wanted to be further inside. That was very well done.
Very hipster of you. I don't watch Hamilton. I'm really into this 40-year-old play called 7076. Nobody's ever heard of it. It's way better.
Oh wow, so much cred. Oh. Yeah, the key to analyzing any good work of art is to have another more obscure work of art you compare it to.
Yeah.
It's just lock people out of the conversation just as quickly as you can. Yeah,
no, I don't listen to opera. There's this drunk Italian guy at my local pub who sings.
Oh, you don't know local drunk Italian guy? Yeah, you're missing out. You're missing out. Who was it who was telling me? Is he traveling South America and they do like, he was at a bar and I think it was Jared, he was saying they were doing like some call and response thing, and like every single person at the bar, like some small village, was like sounded like an opera singer. Like they all just had this, and I mean, I have no idea what sounds like an opera singer means, but it was good enough that he was flawed, and he's a pretty difficult guy to impress. So I think like a culture of regular singing can produce wonderful things.
Yeah, it's so uniting, singing. I was talking to my friends who are I have this group of friends who are Orthodox Christians. I'm really into Jonathan Pajot. I'm not Christian at all. I've never been Christian, but I'm interested as kind of a study of like, I like to learn about the religion, and they're nice people. And so we were talking about one of them was talking about how he used to be part of a Christian church, and it was kind of like a rock concert church, and he found, looking back, he found the songs very kind of shallow or something. And then I said, well, is the Orthodox Church for you, is that also shallow, the singing? And he said, no, everyone's doing it together. It's like, it's the most communal thing. And then we're singing, everyone's kind of facing, I think the pew, he said, like everyone's facing God. And so it's, instead of facing this idol, almost like this concert, these guys, you're all facing God and singing together. And it's remarkable how important that is, I think, for human beings.
Yeah, that is remarkable. It's remarkable. It's important to all be praying in the same direction in some sense. Yeah,
I think that sounds like it has a lot of layers to it.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of a few different things and trying to put them all together into one sentence there. I think there, like I don't know if we've spoken about this already, but I'm sort of, this idea is germinating with me that there are sort of two ways to be with someone with sincerity, let's say, so far as I can tell. So obviously it's very easy to be with people without sincerity. This is Martin Buber's ich est, ich du distinction. It's very easy to go into the coffee shop and to treat the person making the coffee as a coffee machine, essentially, right? It's very easy to completely ignore the human component there and do the transaction and go. So that's being with someone without sincerity, maybe without presence, but with, or it's, it's much simpler than that. You can be speaking with someone and then just like not make eye contact, right? You can just like the simple avoidance of glancing away, or like the prolonged avoidance of staring away. But so the ways of being with someone, as far as I can tell, with sincerity, are looking at each other. So that's dialogue, or looking in the same direction, or looking at the same thing. And I think that's hunting. I think the great dog whisperer Bear Hasofa told me that when dogs hunt, the lead dog will be watching the environment, and all the other dogs will be following him, going the same direction, and sort of watching him. And if he crouches, they'll all crouch, right? He spotted something, they haven't yet. but they get that he has, and so they're all down as well. And I think that's it's something that we don't have a good conscious grasp on often. The idea that like you can do stuff together, and that's a way of building social rapport that isn't as intense and sometimes terrifying as dialogue, and has other benefits. So I think doing things in the same direction is important. That's why you go to, that's why watching TV with someone is nice. But it's also why team sports are nice. So there's that component, and then there's also like prayer as a part of a life well lived is important in itself. But then the idea that you're combining the two, prayer, you've got to have something that you're aiming at that you're asking for, that's worth asking for. But then you also have to have a sense that the other people around you are also aiming at that and asking for that, because that's what gives you a sense of community with purpose, I think, or at least ought to. At least is puts you on the first steps towards that.
I've been thinking about a very similar, the same concept actually, and I was talking to Elliot, my partner, about this, and it's I think it's something like the act of doing something with someone is kind of a masculine way of bonding. Not to say that women can't or men, but like I think a lot of men especially a crucial points in their lives need to bond with other men by doing tasks. So Elliot always says, like, especially when you're meeting up with old men who are part of a different generation, they need to meet up and do something. Like they need to go and fix something together, or like if it's a discussion, they need to be like, hey, we're going to discuss this point. Let's get coffee and discuss this thing. And whereas women we're like, hey, let's go and hang out. Like, let's just go and talk to each other and make eye contact, like you said, and get coffee. And one of the problems with that is that therapy, I think, is a very feminine, quote unquote, feminine way of understanding one's feelings. Like therapy is just sitting there and talking with someone, and it might not necessarily suit that masculine style of like doing things together and then maybe talking about things within that process.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember that the comedian Bill Burr has this piece where he says, like, I've got it all figured out. I'm gonna slip this all in while I'm throwing a ball at my kid. Like he has this whole bit where he's like miming throwing a football and catching a football, and he's giving his kid like the big talk. And that's exactly it, right? You've got to like slip that in while you're focused on something else.
Yeah.
So you don't have that same, I guess, moral confrontation, maybe.
Yeah.
Is a way of putting it. Yeah. But the other, this is the sort of the battle of the sexes point, which is that if a man and a woman go together and do something, then the woman can come out of that being like, you never spend any time with me. And he said, what do you mean? We just went and did this together, which is how he spends time with the guys. But that's not, that doesn't cut it for her. Yeah. She also needs the face-to-face dialogue.
Another point that I heard, I just said men and women, but maybe it's, this applies to children though too. It was, someone said, don't just ask your kid how their day was. Instead, I mean, you can do that too, but they're probably going to say like, oh, it was fine or whatever, but then go and like cook with them and then talk to them about what's going on. And they'll probably open up to you way more when they have a task at hand. Which makes a lot of sense to me. But go on.
Well, a big part of it is just implicit permission of silence. That's a huge thing. Yeah, this is, I mean, you mentioned Elliot, this is something he does very, very well in dialogue. It's an extraordinarily rare thing in dialogue for people to be able to just sit comfortably face to face. But it's remarkably easy to be doing something, right? In that hunting mechanism that we're talking about. If you're both going somewhere, doing an activity together, and conversation flares up and then dies down, it doesn't tend to kick off that anxiety of, oh, why are we not talking right now? It doesn't instantly become uncomfortable. So you can sort of say a bit and maybe just leave something hanging and let the other person chew it over for a while and then respond or not. That possibility exists because you have a sort of scaffolding you're working with, whereas that doesn't exist in the same way in dialogue.
It's very
Does that make
true.
sense?
Ellie does that very well.
Yeah.
He tends to, he can have this conversation with someone and then listen to them, which is extraordinary. Like oftentimes I talk in silences. I have this need to tell someone my opinions, and so I'll give them the advice or whatever, which is I think kind of a normal thing to do in a conversation. And then Elliot, he'll often pause and give people more time, and then he'll leave a space in the conversation, and oftentimes with enough space somebody will speak again and say a little bit more. And yeah, it's such a rare listening quality, like you said. It's fascinating. I don't know how good it is in a podcast though.
Yeah, they have this phrase in radio called dead air.
Yeah.
And that's this exact phenomenon commodified.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely incentive to keep it swinging.
There's something else about talking to people that you mentioned before. You mentioned like when you talk to a barista at a cafe, you might just treat them like a coffee machine. And I have this game that I like to play where I try to see how long it takes to kind of make them become a person again, because they also think of themselves as a coffee machine, I think, in some sense. Like humans have this wonderful ability to become part of the group. And when I say become part of the group, it's almost like we are adopting the personality of the group. Like you go to a bank teller, and the bank teller, when you ask for a loan, doesn't tell you how drunk he got last night and like show you lewd pictures or whatever. He's not doing any of that. He's or if he does, it's wildly out of place.
Unless it's a bank to very, very wealthy people.
Yeah.
And then the rules change again.
Yeah, and then the rules change. You know the guy, you went to the same fraternity with him, or you just know him. Yeah, it's true. The rules do change. But the example that Jonathan Pajot uses is mall Santas. Like if the mall Santa tells your kid about his divorce with his wife and how bad it went, it's a major violation of trust, and he is no longer Santa in that sense. He actually stops being Santa. And so that means Santa is an entity. It's an actual, you know what Santa's personality is, even if you don't worship him or believe in him or whatever.
Worship him?
Yeah, I mean, we do worship Santa in a way, I guess. We leave him cookies and milk as an offering to pray.
Literal food offerings, the oldest and most basic of pagan ritual.
We sacrifice a cookie at the altar for Santa.
Yeah.
And so the bank teller, the barista, whatever, they take on the personality of the cafe as if the cafe is a person that and that person is a limb of the cafe. And oftentimes I play this game of like, how long does it take for this person not to be the limb of the cafe anymore? Like, what can you say immediately to kind of jolt them out of their kind of rhythm? And it's usually just a question that isn't expected, I think, is generally the way to go. A question about the tattoo, maybe a personal question, like a joke.
Do you have a killer line that works every time sort of deal? Do you have a go-to?
I don't. I generally just comment on I've been breaking down social rules lately and figuring out how they work. And one really useful social rule is to comment on a mutual thing that we both see. And so if I see someone in the street walking down, and I saw someone in the street the other day, and he was carrying a reusable coffee mug that I was interested in buying, and so I stopped and asked him about it. And it's kind of something that just shows up in the environment, and but it's not weird to come and talk to someone because it's like, oh, I was thinking about buying that. What do you think?
Right. You know? This is the old men fixing something together again. So now you're both focused on the coffee mug, and he's not he's not in the suddenly, under the glaring light of the KGB interrogation.
Mm.
Yeah.
And the secret is that most people want to talk to other people in public. I think we're wired to want that community vibe and to just meet people and have a chat. But most of us don't. We don't have a way to do so, I think.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? Do you have a way? Oh, go on.
Yeah. Well, this is what I was going to say. I think there are a few like what turns of phrase that people have used over the years that I didn't really get, and I was like, whatever you're saying is working, and I don't really understand why, but I'm going to take it on faith and just go with it. And someone once, I'm not even sure who, but he said like he would ask people in baristas and bartenders and so on, but his go-to phrase was long shift today, or how long is your shift? Yeah. And that instantly got every time just killer. And I mean, I've been using it for years. Just how long is your shift? It's the perfect first question, and I think it like just hearing you talk through your analysis of the cafe as a person and the barista as a limb, it really gives me a sort of new insight into this phrase, because what's baked into the question is this idea that the barista is clearly a human with all the depths and wild dreams and what have you of a human, who is being paid to be here for a certain amount of time. And how long is that? And then the response is inevitably about the emotional state of the barista rather than the financial state of the cafe, right? It's always like, oh yeah, oh man, big one today, and resolve, or like, oh, it's been ages, and exhaustion, or it's no, not a long one today, which is optimism, and it's straight away about the person behind the role. So that seems to work.
Instead of living, we mentioned two-dimensional and three-dimensional kind of, but I'd like to talk about this more perhaps later, but instead of living in this two-dimensional world of kind of being in the cafe, being of the cafe. So if I were to go up to them and be like, hey, you used the wrong type of milk and I don't like it, they're very much in the cafe at that point, right?
Yeah.
And then asking long shift kind of puts them above and like, oh, I am a human working with this entire life, and I'm currently working in this job, and how is my emotional state? Like, let's check in. And yeah, it's like an overview more or less, I guess.
Yeah, it's a girdle jump. Yeah. I don't know if that's a technical term. My friend Michal was reading Gödel Shabbat, and he came and introduced this to me, and a whole lot of things clicked together. But Kurt Gödel, I'm most familiar with it from the mathematical side, but from, I guess, technically the formal logical side. Kurt Gödel was a mathematician who famously proved that a system can either be complete or coherent, but not both. So coherent means it makes internal sense, there are no contradictions, and complete means it is capable of describing everything within its purview, including itself. So what that shakes out to is in any mathematical or logical system, you're going to have a question, at least one question somewhere about something very fundamental that you can't actually answer from within that system, and you need a meta system to answer that question. But then, of course, the meta system has this exact same property that it can't describe everything on its level either. You go one level up on that. Can
you give an example?
Yeah, I should be able to give you a bunch. Give me a moment here. So the book by Douglas Hofstadter, Gödel Shabbat, is based around this idea that same that mathematical idea is also represented in, for example, the art of MC Escher. So MC Escher does the staircase that seem to be ascending forever, but he also does like these works where there's like a the painting appears to be coming out of the painting. I don't know if I'm explaining this well. And there's like this white circle in the middle of the painting that is sort of like that the I think that the person inside the painting is maybe tearing out or pulling through, and so there's that little gap in the middle of the painting is sort of the way you look at the painting. It looks like that's not part of the painting. That's a hole in the painting, and that hole in the painting is what makes it possible for it to feel like you're like the painting is self-aware, like the painting knows that it's in two dimensions and that you're looking at it from somewhere else. That's not very clear, but yeah, if that wasn't clear, the bit about Bach and how fugues represent a different level of conversation within music is going to be even worse. But here we go. So you have like you have music is like tension resolution, or tension, interesting tension resolution, right? And so like that pattern keeps going, and I think from what I gather, great musicians like Bach, they'll also have the entire first bit of the symphony or whatever is really not my wheelhouse, but the entire first song, let's say, or first movement will create a tension that you can hear if you really listen to all the music. Like it's all creating tension, and so even though it has tension resolution within it, it also has this grand tension above it, and then the next bit will play with that tension in addition to all its little conventional tension, and then ideally over the course of the entire piece of an hour or two, that the grand tension is also brought to a resolution. And so like the surf, like there's one level of analysis where it's just doing this, and then there's another level of analysis where it's doing that. Yeah, so Richard Feynman said that you only really, I think it was Feynman, it might have been Bohr, I think it was Feynman, he said you only really understand quantum physics if you can explain it to your grandmother. I don't think I understand quantum physics here. No, I'm not doing it. I
read a book on quantum physics, and I think I understand less now somehow.
Oh, that's good. That's progress.
I'm on the right track.
Yeah. Niels Bohr would be very proud of you.
Good.
Yeah.
So can you okay, so how does this apply to the cafe? Or I think this also applies to religion, this idea. Sure.
So in the cafe, when you walk in, you're playing in the game you're playing is called buying coffee. And here's how it goes. You go into the cafe, you say, hey, I mean, if you're polite, you'll say something like, hey, how are you? You say, oh, good, thanks, how are you? And you'll say, yeah, great, I'd like a you might say thank God, and maybe you can still slip that in without shattering anything, but you say, I'd like a this, and you say, okay, well, that'll be this much money. And you say, okay, I'd like a cappuccino with 1 sugar. And he says, all right, that'll be $4. I say, oh, sorry, I meant large. Oh yeah, large cappuccino, $4.50. 1 sugar, yeah. Okay, here's the money. Get that in a takeaway cup. Yep, great. Okay, just right over there, it will come out. I walk over and I wait, and after a couple of minutes, the coffee appears, and I say thank you, and I pick it up and I walk out. Every single bit of that interaction, except maybe the thank God, has been planned out by whoever's running the local chapter of Buy a Coffee. Like the guy who owns the cafe, or the manager on detail, or the worker, whatever, has a sort of schematic where people come in, they maybe, if they're nice and they're having a good day, they'll exchange some pleasantries. You polite, buy the thing, move on. And so then there'll be everything there is accounted for, and there are possibilities that break that. So if like you were saying, if you come in and you're like, oh, that's a really interesting tattoo, tell me about it. If the person is like, that starts to press against the edge of the game, because well, I'm not prepared for this. I mean, I've been told be polite, but what does that mean here? So maybe oh yeah, I've I got that when I was in Thailand, and if the person is committed to staying in game, like the barista might become really uncomfortable if you push that. Might say like, yeah, thanks, we've got someone else I got to serve. just give me, whatever, like some sort of social dodge. But if not, you can sort of drag the person out of that game, and now you're playing the game of genuine social conversation. And so part of like what we're doing when we say, can we, get out of the game, get out of the game of buying a coffee, is, can we talk to the person as a person, right? Because the game of coffee requires that the person is a barista. The role is what's going on, is that part of the dance. And then, interacting with them as a person in some sense requires, either breaking or subverting in some way the game of buying a coffee.
So it's a complete game in itself. I'm still trying to understand this. So it's a complete game in itself in terms of like the whole process of buying a coffee is mapped out. Oh, go on.
It was just like when you said it's a complete game in itself, I was suddenly thinking of it in terms of like in Gödel's theorem, the word complete has a specific mathematical meaning. I don't think that's what you're talking about.
Okay,
here.
No, it's not. It's definitely
okay.
not. I'm a solid high school year 10 level math is my level of math, so no.
Right, but there's a game. It has a beginning, middle, end. It functions. Most of the time, it just goes.
But it can't. You said it can't explain itself. It can't.
Yeah, well, look, if you start talking about the game, like if you go in and you start having this conversation with the barista, you are breaking the game. Idea. It would be a great idea, but you are instantly, you are no longer playing buying a coffee.
Yeah.
You are now playing buying coffee. You're still playing buying coffee as well, but you're also playing discuss buying coffee, which is the level above buying coffee, and which may be well on your way into like speaking with barista as a human. Maybe you're path into that.
So this is why part of the reason why I find you so fascinating is because in terms of my interest in Judaism, I think you play this game very well, where you can see the two-dimensional buying the coffee version of Judaism, which is you follow the rules and you end up with a good life almost all the time. Most of the time you follow all the rules. It's a good way to live. And then there's also the talking about the rules and why we do the rules, which is I think I think this sort of line of thinking needs to be introduced in order to appeal to, and maybe I'm overstepping myself, but from what I believe, appeal to the young atheists. Like a lot of people they're seeing religion and they're saying, well, clearly these things didn't actually happen. Like these miracles couldn't have happened. It's not real. And so I'm going to cast the entire thing away. It's some subset of people say that. And then there's another way of saying, well, wait a second, you're playing the buying the coffee game. And, you've just figured out that when the barista asks you, how are you? They don't actually mean, how are you? Okay. So like, let's take a step back. But there's actually a reason why we play the buy the coffee game. And it's because, many reasons. Like there's a reason why we play the religion game, and it's, and you don't necessarily need to believe in the literal experience of miracles for that to be true, although you can. And
right. This analogy I think works beautifully on a bunch of levels. For one thing, right, when you first figure out that there's an insincerity in the barista's question, oh, how are you? So first of all, it can be shocking. If you thought you were having a real conversation with barista and now you find out you weren't, that could feel damaging or even like a betrayal. And the second thing is, you figure, well, if this is false, then the whole game is false. And then a reasonable third thing is, well, I'm not playing this because this game is false. And then what happens is you just never have coffee, right? And then it's a short step from that to like decrying the falseness of coffee altogether. And in some sense, like the long road back begins with saying, hang on, but like caffeine still exists. Like, why is coffee being delivered in this method? I don't know. Maybe the method has, has a lot of has properties that I don't understand. Maybe I don't know how they developed. Some of them might be good mechanisms, some of them might be bad mechanisms, but fundamentally coffee is happening. People are being caffeinated. And so you can start backwards and say, well, could people be caffeinated differently? What would that look like? How could we change the coffee delivery mechanism, would that ruin the whole coffee enterprise? And so a whole lot of questions arise from that. And so that's fascinating.
You had, I think, I'm not quite as familiar with your background as I would like to be, but I think you did kind of go through a period of exploration with your religion. Is that right?
Oh yeah, just gingerly tiptoeing over there. A little period, just brief couple of week periods. I did the the piano cruise. 2 weeks in and out, boom boom, done. I am being vaguely flippant. So I mean, for me, like it actually started very much with the false coffee. I think I was 13. I started becoming interested in theology, and so at that point what was the case? So we didn't have a printer at home. That was still pretty state of the art. And my saintly father, he had a printer at his workplace, and he had he'd get these emails every week from like yeshivas in Israel or America that would send out discussions about the weekly Torah portion or what have you. And he'd print them off and bring them home. And at that point, the point when I became interested in theology, I said, well, how about, I'm interested in this. Can you start bringing home more sheets that talk about, the nature of God, the existence of God, proofs for the existence of God, and so on. And he was like, all right. And so he did. And so he started bringing home these sorts of sheets. And one of them was mentioned something called St. Anselm's Ontological argument. And I didn't know what that was. And I asked my dad if I could go look it up at the library. And he said, well, ask the Rav. And I asked the Rav, and the Rav said, yeah, go for it. And so I went to the library, and I just started wandering around the philosophy section. I think first in the adult library, and I found Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian, and read a bit of that. And I was like, well, that's pretty intense stuff. And then I wandered over, they had a philosophy section in the kids' library, which kind of remarkable now that you think about it. And I read something, a book called The Philosophy Files by Stephen Law, which is like a popular retelling with cartoons of the state of philosophy, essentially, like the big questions of philosophy, and the big names through the ages who've had opinions on those big questions, and what their opinions have been, and sort of where modern philosophers tend to fall on, like how, what the answer, or how close we are to an answer on this question. And anyway, like I think the first one was the first question he dealt with was, is it morally wrong to eat animals? And the second question he dealt with was, is there a God? And he made it very clear that the state of play of philosophy as he understood it in the modern world was that there is not, that the popular conception of God is built on a series of false suppositions, and that the whole thing is I don't know, if not a sham, then at least built on a wrong on a false foundation, let's say. And that really flipped me overnight. I mean, I came from a very religious family, very religious community, and I became like the town atheist. I don't remember the order of operation to the point of days, but certainly within months, maybe weeks, and may have been days, I was like, not gone, and I abandoned the religion wholesale. I was still going to a religious school, and so people would argue with me at the religious school, and I would love it because I've always loved a good argument, and I guess I've been good at it. That's been my sport of choice. And
it's the traditional Jewish sport.
Exactly, very traditional. Yeah. I think Yankee Klein pointed out to me that at a certain point in the 70s, we were watching like a documentary on the Polgar sisters, and there was a point in the 70s where the three big players in international chess were Russia, America, and Hungary. And the great chess champion of each of those countries was Jewish. I thought that was very funny. Like they just sending their Jews out to compete, like a cerebral representation of the Cold War. No one really knows what's going on with chess. Anyway, the point is that I became the town atheist. I would argue vigorously and freely with anyone who wanted an argument, and often with people who didn't. And I was quite brash and annoying about it. And that went on for like good 6-7 years. And then I sort of mellowed out and became a bit more live or let live. And in that time, I was 17. I started doing Kung Fu. And most Kung Fu is Buddhist in origin, or at least Buddhist in practice. So the Shaolin monks, famously, are like the warrior monks. That's where most Kung Fu comes from the Shaolin temples. The specific types of Kung Fu that I didn't come from those temples, which are all over China. They came from a specific set of Taoist monasteries based in and around the Wu-Tang Mountains. And a big part of those, the sort of, the identity or the history of the culture around these martial arts is that they are Taoists, not Buddhists. And I was like, what is this? And so I sort of started reading Taoist stuff to get a better handle of Kung Fu. And I found it really useful and interesting and insightful. And I don't think I disagreed with, some of the premises of the metaphysics, but it seemed to be quite wise, a source of a lot of wisdom. I think that was the first time where I really started to, respect the wisdom of religion, separate to rejecting the basic premises or the basic explicit premises of religion. And then it went from from Taoism, I eventually came to a similar appreciation of Buddhism, to a lesser degree Hinduism, but still very much there, and then eventually Islam, and that
really
sort
the
of
final boss of
really the final boss of ecumenism. Yeah, it really was. I mean, I remember like getting to this point where I was like, okay, I get how Lao Tzu and the Buddha are similar guys, and also really familiar from like the stories of like sages and righteous men from my own tradition. And I get how I get how Jesus is like acting out the same archetype again, obviously, but I don't know about this Islam thing. I don't know about the man they call the Rasul, the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm not so sure. I don't know. Maybe not. And then I made a dear Muslim friend, and we had a lot of discussions about it, and he finagled me into reading the Quran a bit, and that was it. It was gone.
Have you read the Hadiths?
I haven't read many hadiths, but my friend Omar has told me some hadiths, which I back to the hipster purism. It's like, nah, I didn't read hadiths. I have Muslims recite them for me in coffee shops as intended.
As intended, yes.
Come on.
Over dark Turkish coffee, yes.
I'm not that legit. I still get my cappuccino 1 sugar from the earlier conversation, but it is an oral tradition.
It's not quite there. It's not a shisha bar, but it's one step below.
Exactly. I guess that's a bit of an overview.
And how did you round back out to Buddhism, to Judaism? How did you get back?
Well, look, here's something that I happen to believe that I think is a bit controversial. As far as I can tell, Islam is the most pro-Jewish religion outside of Judaism, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't. How?
Well, I mean, formally. So the Quran is arranged in order of chapter by size, I think, with the exception of the first chapter. So the first chapter is called Al-Fatiha, the opening it's cognate, I think, with the Hebrew poteach, meaning to open. And it's, you know, it's a recitation of the praises of God and you know, a prayer or two in there. Okay, so it's praise and prayer and good. And then the second chapter starts again with like a short prayer, and then this line: "This is the book about which there is no doubt, a guide for those who are righteous and upright," something like that. I'm not getting the second part precisely right, I don't think. But that notion, this is the book about which there is no doubt, is sort of central to Islam. This idea that the Quran itself is word perfect. Every line in it is direct revelation from God to the Prophet. And the Hadith and the Sunnah, if you're Sunni, are just, you know, good stories about the Prophet that you should probably take seriously. You just jack up the brightness here. Great. You should probably take seriously, but some of them are probably fake. But you know, it's if you read enough of them, eventually you'll get the sense of good ways to be. I mean, then there's whole schools about like which of the hadiths are good hadiths versus bad hadiths and whatever. But fundamentally, it's, you know, the Quran is the book that you have to go for if you're Muslim. And I think that, like, I haven't read the whole thing, so I may be you know, I may have a myopic view here, but you know, remember the first chapter is the opening, and then the second chapter is the biggest chapter. It's called Al-Baqarah, the cow, and it's primarily about the wanderings of Moses and the Jews in the desert following the Exodus from Egypt, and it's it's really explicit about well, I mean in its own language, about Jews being the chosen people. Like there's a verse. I want to see if I get it exactly right. For indeed we have chosen you and elevated you above all peoples, and why then do you reject me? Like, that's a line from Allah. And I'm like, reading this in the Quran of all places, that was a bit of a jolt. I you know, to quote the meme, and I took that personally. And you know, there's another line this is in Ali Imran, so it's the third chapter, it's 20th, 21st verse, I think. And if they dispute with you, the people of the book, or those who read not, tell them I have submitted myself to Allah in Islam, and if they I don't know, and if they follow you or something, or if they agree with you, they are rightly guided. But if not, then upon you is only the duty of notification, and Allah is seeing of His servants. So I don't know, that's pretty explicit to me too.
Why isn't it coming out in practice then? I mean,
asking the right questions. The big answer to that is that there's a doctrine, I think it's actually two doctrines with the same name, confusingly, called Aggregation, the doctrine of abrogation. I think that refers to two different doctrines in Islam. One doctrine is this the idea that later verses override earlier verses. So if there are two different commandments in the Quran or whatever, and there's a contradiction, you go whatever's chronologically later, which interestingly isn't the same as the order in the book. It's the chapters were given at different times, and there's a sort of, I think, a received history on what those times were, and whatever was later chronologically is what you side with. Okay.
Muhammad went to war a lot later on, didn't he?
A lot later on, yeah. So that's part of it, right? So like the more peace-loving aspects are seen as earlier verses that are overridden by a bit more of the warfare-y aspect. Although I will say, there's a particular chapter that deals with the laws of war, and that a Muslim traditionally reads, I think, on the night before battle. And I've read it, and it's pretty chill, considering it's about war. from what I recall. Anyway, the point is the first doctrine of abrogation is that, later overrides. But the second doctrine of abrogation is the idea that later prophets override earlier prophets. So the idea is that Jews are great. Jews, like the point of Jews is Jews should be good Jews until Jesus shows up. And then all Jews should abandon Judaism and be good Christians until Muhammad shows up. And then all Jews and Christians should abandon Judaism and Christianity and become Muslims. Like that's the dominant religious account. I don't know of any proper I don't know of any real support for this from the Quran itself. And I would point to at least 2 verses just offhand that quite strongly imply the contrary. But it's not my faith, it's not my business to do so. But essentially that sort of gets Muslims into the same position that a lot of evangelical Christians get into, which is, as much as sure, try and be like the Nazarene in charity, and so that, as you've fed me, so you've fed, you visited the man in jail, so you visited me in jail, you fed the poor, it's like you're feeding me and all. Yeah, good work there, sure. But unless you happen to explicitly declare your belief in this fundamental principle that's mutually exclusive with everything else, there's no heaven for you. Like that trap that I think evangelical Christianity, or some, I don't know, evangelical, that's not fair, that a lot of Christianity falls into. It's the same for Islam, as far as I can tell. That sort of that conclusion follows from the premises. From if you're going to buy into the doctrine of abrogation, then Jews and Christians, no matter how good a job they do, aren't going to heaven. And I don't buy that, and I don't think that's right, and I also don't think that's what the Quran thinks. So there.
It's also what I love about Judaism is that they're never knocking on your door asking if you've heard the good word. Like it's always like, and you can still go to heaven. There are the 7 Noahide laws. So an atheist who is, maybe not an atheist actually, because we don't know who gets into heaven and who doesn't. But a person who is essentially a good person, although one of the Noahide laws is to believe in God, I believe. As long as they are a good person, they will be judged righteously, and they don't need to follow all of the Jewish rules, which makes it a lot easier to convert to a religion where I don't have to constantly be worried about people's salvation.
Yeah, well, there's this line in Lahavdil in the Tao Te Ching, where something like, if heaven were real, it would be liable to rend. And I think I asked my friend Jets about this. He said, well, I think it was him. He said something like, well, if you just think it through, right? If heaven's real and only some people get in and you get in, but your whole family doesn't, how fun is heaven going to be for you exactly? That doesn't sound like a delightful paradise.
No.
So that, heaven is internally contradictory. That's the sort of argument there. But Judaism has a lot of backdoors into heaven, like a lot. I mean, just 2 offhand. One is I was reading today, somewhere in the Talmud it says there are 3 things a man does, and when he does them, his sins are wiped out. It's like achieving a position of authority, getting married, and something else I forget. And then the other thing is there's one great story where one of the sages meets the prophet Elijah, come from heaven, manifest, and he says, and they're in a market, and Elijah says, "Oh, see those 2 guys over there? They're going to heaven." Like, "Oh, really?" And he goes over and he's like, "Excuse me, gentlemen, what is it that you 2 do?" Like, "Oh, us, we're clowns when people are depressed. We make them feel better."
Oh,
Yeah.
that's very nice.
Isn't it?
That's there's this idea in, if you follow again, Jonathan Pageau, he interprets things, he interprets scripture and also mythology and fairy tales kind of symbolically. And so you might see the clown as something like the lowest rung on the tier, on the hierarchy, like he's the fool kind of thing. And so it's like, oh, even the fool, the lowest kind of person, can get to heaven. And the fool is also the only one who can speak truth to the king, is kind of the known fact. So even the lowest on the tier has power. That's also similar in the story of David. He's the youngest of the sons. He's like the runt of the family, the abandoned. and he's also full. He's an entertainer and musician. And then
Who?
David. Have you heard of him? King David?
King David. Yeah, sure. Yeah, he is an entertainer. He's the youngest. Yeah. It checks out.
Yeah.
And specifically, he's in sort of dialogue and conflict throughout the Book of Samuel with Saul, who is described as a head and shoulders above other men. Right. So Saul is very much the quarterback build. So you have that discourse again.
Anyway, I want to go back though. I can talk about King David forever, and I might in a bit, but I want to go back to how you got back into Judaism from Islam.
Yeah. Okay. So how to get into Judaism from Islam? Yeah. Well. Okay. So something I was getting quite good at the time was I guess, I mean, the simple version of it is just like putting myself in other people's shoes, like, I guess, really active empathy, where I was like, I try and take a situation and be like, okay, really try and understand what the other person is going through in this moment. Really just stop, sit down, like, look through this person's eyes. What is he seeing? Why? Like, what are the basic premises here? How's this all coming together? And like that, I was sort of using that everywhere, but where it was really interesting was in like my explorations of religion, where like a lot of the time, like I think when people try and investigate religion, they're like, what do you guys believe? It's like, oh, we believe that the moon is the third goat of the charioteer. And like, how about that? And that wouldn't be enough for me. I'd be like, okay, the third goat. Okay, explain again the charioteer. And I just try and get what is going on with this moon. Like, and then eventually you sort of need to let your eyes unfocus and just look at the moon and see that goat. And then you're like, oh, the goat, right? And then that's, to me, I mean, there's always the question of how well are you really approximating other people's internal states or whatever. But until you can at least sort of do that, I feel like for me, I wasn't even in the conversation really. I was having a conversation about the conversation. And so that was how do I put it? Yeah, so that's what I was sort of doing with that throughout like my religious explorations. And so like people would posit all sorts of weird things. I'd be like, okay, how do I get my head around this? And then I'd really, really make an effort to get my head around that. And so with Islam, it's like the Quran is, from a literary point of view, it's very distinct from our own Torah, lahavdil, in that like the Torah, the 5 books of Moses is written in the third person, and God is, a main character, maybe the main character. I mean, maybe the main character in more ways than one, but there are other characters and they have dialogue, and sometimes God talks and sometimes other people talk, and sometimes God's motivations are explicit and sometimes they're not. The Quran is not like that, lahavdil. It's like it's the whole thing is in the second person, and it's God speaking directly to the prophet, right? So it's like, as we have said to you, and then like it's just God quoting previous prophecies. And remember our warning of blah. I think God speaks in the first person, like plural, like royal we. But that's the whole thing. The whole thing is this dialogue that the prophet's having with God, and God is speaking in the first person. So, and in the second person, I mean, yeah, first person and second person. So he's saying, I this, you this, they this, right? And so in order to read the Quran at all, you kind of have to posit and God as an interlocutor. And so like that's otherwise it's non-starter. Like you can't like say, I don't believe in God and then read the Quran. Well, who are you talking to? It's like the mall Santa again. It's like you have to at least sort of get Santa as a role before you can go up and sit on his lap, or or ask him out of divorce.
Who are you?
But that's it, like so I had to sort of posit God again to just to really even read the book. And so positing God again was like a really intense psychological experience to me. so there was that, and I was like, oh, I get, like, that makes a lot more sense to me than it used to, than it ever did. And I think I had a lot more to draw on from I mean, from the experiential sense of like the oneness of all things, and through like meditation and drugs and what have you, like that the epiphanious experience, and also from the from the writings of like Joseph Campbell, like Hero of a Thousand Faces and what have you, like this idea of like deities being nested into like these giant complexes of ideas and representing a whole bunch of stuff, and all of that, and like the idea that you could interact with a grand idea or a spirit or an ideal as if it were a person, and that produced really interesting and noteworthy and occasionally useful psychological phenomena. And so all of this was going on in the background, and then it just sort of hit me like a steam train. So there was that, and then there was also the it sort of rounded out my I guess my personal non-rending heaven, like that coming to that understanding that Islam was, as far as I could tell, like another genuine prophetic faith that was pointing in the same direction as every other faith that I'd encountered and explored. That was sort of that was, I guess, I want to say maybe a relief. Yeah, like that there isn't a permanent holy war that sort of has to exist. I think like holy wars between holy peoples are kind of ephemeral, and I think that everyone has, like, every major world culture. I mean, I don't know all of the minor ones, but as far as I can tell, every major world culture has, so far as I can tell, begun the serious work of personal and societal introspection and repentance and healing. And that's really elevating to know that, and to feel part of the broad global community of people trying to climb up the mountain, and to know that being very much tied into and bound by the specific local filial or national covenant that you have isn't a contradiction of that, and is in fact exactly how that broader family effort is achieved. Yeah, it's not achieved through everyone endorsing a wishy-washy universalism and leaving it at that. It's achieved through people being extremely rigorous in their personal local religious practice, to the point that it is genuinely purifying and redemptive for the individual and for the community around the individual, and then for the communities to have good effects on each other after that. And that, all of that is sort of tied in together.
Wow. I feel a sense of ease when you say that. Like it's a nice way to, it's a relieving way to see the world as different people achieving their own, or climbing the mountain, as you say, in their own way, without needing to ideally without needing to expand and show the rest of the world that this is the true religion. In fact, they're all in a way the true religions. Maybe. It does sound like you went on your own kind of Rumspringa. The Amish send their, I mean, I'm sure you know, but the Amish send their kids away for 2 years to the modern world, and so they can come back and make a decision on whether or not they want to stay Amish. And it's it might be one of the best practices. I think a lot of Jewish people do that on their own, but it seems like once you leave and you come back, you've made your decision more fully, and you kind of perhaps understand the implications of the decision better. What would you say to any atheists out there who are struggling with religion?
I don't believe that you have to buy into anything that violates your conscience or your sense of truth in order to seriously and fully engage in a faith practice. At least, well, I can say that with considerable confidence with Judaism, and I have a strong hunch that that the case is, also strong with other faiths. Lahavdil. I don't know that I don't know that the best way, in fact, I'm pretty confident that the best way to engage with religious practice, if you're interested in engaging with religious practice altogether, right? Some people just aren't, and they're born without it and they don't want it, and thank you very much. So I guess I'm not really trying to sell anything to any of those people. But for people who are not religious, or perhaps were religious and aren't anymore, but who would like to be, or who see redemptive aspects to the faith, and would like those, I think I'd really emphasize that fact that it can be done without betraying your own ideals or rationalist worldview.
A rationalist worldview specifically is interesting. If you look at a lot of the rationalists, like there's a specific community of people called rationalists, and they seem to be almost wholly atheist. But I agree with you. I think it's very possible to be, by some definitions, perhaps a religious atheist. Although I wouldn't consider myself one, but yeah. What I wonder though is okay, so like some cultures, we were talking about Islam. I don't really want to rail against Islam, but there's something where okay, let's just take the Bible. Like the Torah has some not commandments, but some, I don't know if they're mitzvahs or not exactly. Mitzvahs are like a commandment from God, but like I've read things in the Bible like burn the witches if you see them, or I think
thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. In the King James translation.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And then there's one about it was a while ago. I'm pretty sure it's the Old Testament. It was if a woman gets raped, then her rapist must pay her father like 40 shekels or something and marry her. And they're all, I mean, are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, he cannot divorce her all his days.
Mm. And so but Judaism doesn't practice these, right? And so somehow somehow the Jewish people have managed to believe on one instance that that Moses was transmitting the true word of God, and on the other hand, Judaism has managed not to suffer. It's managed to suffer, which is to live somehow.
Well,
And, yeah, and there's, as far as I know, no enforcement of marriage after a man rapes a woman. So
yeah. Well, that goes back even to the like to the legal development through the Talmud. But my I think like there's a what a the rabbinic interpretive system seems to be like very healthy for like the faith in general. There's a verse somewhere that's like, and you shall follow after like the sages in your generation, and like that's taken as a very powerful springboard to like extremely intricate analysis and what would you say, extrapolation of like the relatively rudimentary legal system that exists in the Torah into this extraordinarily elaborate and detailed legal system that exists in the Talmud and is and in the later codices and is practiced by Jews today. And one of the striking things about it is that you have a lot of laws that like, wow, I guess if you're a group of nomads on your way through a desert trying not to savagely butcher and eat each other, this is a pretty good blunt instrument of a law to have. But I don't know if this is really the best thing we can come up with as civilized folk.
Yeah.
And sort of taking that and keeping the explicit commandment and keeping and just like having a whole superstructure of conditions around it and situational nuances that completely change the way it's practiced. And that canonically is a process of drawing out the meaning that's already in the verse rather than just shoving stuff back in there. But the practical upshot of it is that like in the verse like about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, all that, like it seems to be explicitly referring to like cutting off people's limbs in retribution for cut off limbs, but it's very emphatically like within the Jewish legal tradition seen as, oh well, you have a value to these limbs, and the value is set by like a bunch of different calculations. Then there's a penalty for injuring people in these ways, and the whole thing is financial, but it's like got several layers, all of which are based around the idea that that's what that passage means, that it's about paying like a steep fine and like for their medical insurance and the pain and the shame and like the gap between earning potential and like all these things sort of get folded into it, but it's not a ritual cutting off of the hand. Whereas, as you say, it does seem to be, well, I mean, look, not a lot of hand cutting off in the Muslim world. Like some, I think, maybe in Saudi Arabia, like I think the Wahhabis will do it. I hope I'm not speaking out of too much ignorance here. And I think there's also some beheadings or stonings there, but I don't know. Does it still happen in Pakistan? I don't know. Does it still happen in Indonesia? Does it still happen in Jordan, Egypt? I feel like not. Like I don't think I've ever seen like a one-handed Arab before, a one-handed Muslim.
Yeah.
So like I don't think it's still widely practiced. But I don't know. Again,
there's other
like
things that are widely practiced that are I would say could be updated in some ways.
Yeah.
But it's not my area of expertise anyway. So the Talmud though is so as far as I understand, there are the initial books. There's the Torah and the Tanakh, and then the Talmud is all these rabbis throughout time have argued and created their own sort of judicial structure or something, and their own interpretations of the books through the oral text. So it's through I guess there were oral interpretations of what happened that kind of went alongside the Bible, and then it was written down at some point. Is that somewhat correct?
Yeah.
Does that continue today? Is there anyone sort of updating it to today's standards?
Now you come to the crux of the issue. So in I think the 5th, 6th century, the Talmud was codified. It was sort of these hundreds of years of the minutes of various rabbinic arguments within academies, between academies, was codified and written down, and that sort of became the foundation of Jewish law. And the idea is that that's sort of what we've got to work with until the Messiah comes and reestablishes the High Court in Jerusalem, and we can take another serious look at some of this stuff. And so in some sense, we're working with an extremely sophisticated piece of cultural software that hasn't received any major updates to its functioning in like 1500 years. And that's, I mean, on the one hand, it's kind of a bit kind of incredible that it hasn't, that, what would you say? It's remarkable that it hasn't received an update in so long. And it's also remarkable that it functions as well as it does, considering it hasn't received an update in so long. But I'm very fond of asking people this question. I say, if, like, suppose the Sanhedrin is reestablished tomorrow, and they're taking submissions from the public for laws to take another look at, for laws to be re-examined in practice, what would you propose? And I love the way this is sort of, I love the way the sentence, this question brings out really interesting conversation from people in a way that, going back to that coffee shop thing, it draws them out of their standard apologetic polemic dialectic. I don't know if that made sense. People feel like they have their way of life, and they got to defend it, and that's it. And if anyone tries to get involved in a way that they don't like, they have to shut that down real quick. And partly that's built around canon and dogma, and partly that's just like the human instinct for self-preservation or what have you, or the preservation of one's worldview, culture, station in life, whatever. But when you ask this question, people are very willing to give you responses to that. Rabbis, I found, are very willing to give me responses to that, and really interesting, really thoughtful responses. So there's this understanding that the law is progressing, and that the law is on pause, and that it's been on pause for a long time, and we're hoping to take it off pause real soon. But in the meantime, pause is where we're at, and it's by definition not ideal, but it's also a lot better than any alternative you can name. I think it's something like that.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Answers a lot of my questions. What would you send to be a suggestion, or perhaps what's been a good suggestion that you've received?
Oh, I'm happy to answer both. Give me a couple of minutes though.
Sure.
I'll be right back.
Yeah.
God willing. J'arrive.
Don't know what that means, but hello.
think it
What did
means I arrive or I have arrived.
Oh, wonderful.
In France. French.
So I asked before what you would send in as a submission to be changed about Judaic law.
Okay, so what I would send in, my hunch is that we could do with another look at the laws of agunot. They're literally, I think, bound women. There's this phenomenon in Judaism. The way a divorce is enacted is that the husband will write out a document or have a document written out for him, and he will hand it to the woman, or one of his messenger will hand it to the woman. And because of that, if a man wants to be really nasty, he can just like run off and not hand over the document, and then she can't get remarried because she's still legally wed to him. And compounding the awfulness is that there's a that while polyandry is like strictly biblically forbidden, polygyny is like only like a later decree. So like women definitely can't have multiple husbands in Judaism. Can men have multiple wives? Like we don't, but like that's because of a decree like 1,000 years ago in Constantinople, rather than something straight out of the Torah from like 3,500 years ago. So 1,000 years in Jewish time is pretty short, and so that rule is subject to being a lot more relaxed. And so what can actually happen is that a divorce will happen, and the man will just or a separation will happen. The man will refuse to give his wife a writ of divorce and just run off somewhere and marry someone else, and he can have a whole extra family, and she's just stuck there in limbo indefinitely. Yeah. So
yep.
Yeah. So look, there are a bunch of angles on that. Traditionally, the practical Jewish response to these sorts of cases is to beat him until he gives a divorce.
Very practical.
Very practical. And then within the Talmudic discourse, the question arises like, well, he has to give it voluntarily. You can't, if you coerce him to give the document isn't valid. So, how can you beat him? It's like, no, you don't understand. We don't beat him until he gives the document. We beat him until he wants to give the document.
Genius.
Yeah, so that's really fun. So that's the traditional response to these situations. But at the moment, I think in America, there are people who are in prison for it. In a Hasidic society that was done, and a lot of people went on trial for it. I think some people went away for it. So that's starting to rub up against the practicalities of modern society in a serious way. And so there's that response. Another thing is some people are turning to social media in a big way to pressure people who get deniers into giving their wife a get, this religious document, this bill of divorce. And because of social media, it's much harder to just run off to a foreign country and leave your past behind you because it follows you there. So that I think has had some success, this sort of these mass social media campaigns. And then the other interesting avenue is I had this wonderful woman named I hope I got it right, Talia Fagenbaum, on my podcast, and she's a lawyer in Victoria, and one of her I guess angles, one of the things she's trying to accomplish is to have the refusal to give a get classified as a form of spousal abuse under Australian common law.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so that's very noble, and that might see some fruits. So there are some early successes in that. It looks like it's going to take a lot more to get all the way through, but that could be something.
I read this story about something like the only Jew left in Afghanistan or something, and he was there, I think, in part because he was refusing to give his wife a divorce.
I heard that. I don't know the details of the case, but I remember being really disappointed about that because, there's this like romantic, chaotic notion of like, oh, the last Jew in Afghanistan. Let's make a Broadway about it. Oh, that's what. Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
So, yeah, really disappointed.
It sheds a lot more light on what kind of person he was. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe I don't know the situation. I don't know if that's actually the case, but
that's true.
But I will say that look, speaking from a position of immense ignorance, I don't understand why we couldn't do more in this case. So something Rabbinic Judaism is fantastic at is taking a core law that is immutable and saying, okay, well, this is immutable, but like how many conditions can we put around it to sort of like the river's running this way, can we direct it around here so it doesn't flood any villages? It's forbidden to dam it, but you can sort of divert it according to certain principles. And I feel like, one avenue, again, this practically probably there are severe problems with doing this, but one avenue would just be like having something like convening a big assembly of like rabbinic judges and having like the man who's the get denied decreed legally unfit, and then having his documentation retroactively nullified. Like, that's a possible angle. Why doesn't that exist? I don't know. Could that exist? Maybe. I'm not good enough at the underlying mechanisms. But anyway, that's so that's my one. My go-to response. A rabbi I asked he said that his proposal would be about women in rabbinics. Yeah, he has. From what I know, he has at least one very bright, very learned daughter, and the way things currently are, she doesn't get to be a rabbi.
No.
Yeah.
It's that is certainly too bad. Although I think from the little interaction, I've had a fair bit of interaction with a small part of the community, so I'm not quite as privy to this as many people are. But it seems as if the Rebbitzin, the wives of the rabbi, do have their own very powerful influence, and especially towards the women in the community. And I wonder if that is I guess technically a rabbi's wife has very little responsibilities aside from the normal responsibilities of a woman, but in practice, as does commonly happen, she has an enormous weight on her shoulders. It seemed like there was from the ones that I've interacted with, it seems like there's kind of this separate women's society that is very, very prominent in the Jewish community. And I do wonder if being learned, it would be very helpful in gaining influence and helping the community from that way.
Yeah. It's really well put, like that notion of a separate women's society. I feel like that there's sort of a shadow government at play in the in the Jewish community, and I think the faith is specifically built in such a way to not only permit that but encourage that really strongly. You can actually see this in the we're reading. This is going to date the podcast a bit, but in the weekly Torah portions, we're just coming to the end of the Jacob cycle, the beginning of the Joseph cycle, right? So we've just gone through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the forefathers, and something that's really jumped out to me this time is the influence of women in the narrative, right? Because in principle, it's like the stories are about these men and their actions and what have you, and there's this sort of there's a sort of universal enfranchisement of men that's sort of like culturally default, let's say. like if you just read stuff about old things, like, oh, it's about the men, and you know, like this quip about like history, more like his story. Am I right? Yeah. So that's like normally it's like, and this guy went and did this and did that and that, whatever. And the Torah really subverts this. Like, so the establishment, you know, after you have this sort of, after you have Adam and Noah, who are really, I'd say they're like dreamtime characters in a lot of ways. Like they're, you know, I know this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, and it really sort of relates back to what we were earlier discussing, but there's a commentary by Rashi, like the great biblical and Talmudic commentator in the Jewish tradition. I think it's the second, so it's on the first verse in the Torah, and it's his second comment. And his second comment is something like, I don't think I have the words exactly right, but something like En omer b'midrash hazeh ela dasheni. There's nothing that this verse is saying except expound me. Like in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Like, yeah, what if you think like it's trying to give you like an astronomy lesson, you're way off. There's nothing this verse is saying except expound me. There's an exposition you're supposed to be drawing out of this story, and that sort of ties in with like the Maimonidean view that like there's very little in the Torah that you actually have to take literally or at face value. It may be that the revelation at Sinai is like the only thing, or possibly revelation at Sinai plus like the fact that we left Egypt, which that's a separate hobby horse, but it is I feel that is sufficiently borne out by what we know of the great Hyksos migrations into and then out of Egypt. Separate discussion. Anyway, point is that so the whole Adam cycle and the Noah cycle is like replete with like this deep, rich, sort of archetypal descriptions, and I actually asked Rabbi about this. I'm like, okay, at what point in the Torah do you think historical characters stop being metaphorical and start being historical? And he said he thinks Abraham. And like Avram's the first character that really goes around, does stuff, has like sustained interactions with people. And the first thing we know about him is that one of the very first things we know about him is that he leaves where like he travels on from like the journey that his father is taking to a new land, and he takes with him his wife who's barren. Like that's really plot central, right? So he has a wife and she doesn't bear many kids, but when he leaves to go on his great adventure, he takes her with him. And that's significant, right? It means that he doesn't just value her for the offspring she can provide him.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the setup. And then when, like he does his adventures and God's like, I'm going to make you into a great nation. You're going to have great offspring, whatever. And then his wife, Sarah, is like, listen, maybe what you'll do is you'll take my handmaiden as a second wife or as a concubine, and maybe through the merit that I accrue through, relinquishing my sole rights to you, say, that God will bless me also with a child. And Abraham, says the text, goes and asks God about this, and God's like, in all things, Shema B'kola, like in all things, heed her voice, listen to her voice. And I think Rashi says like, because she is greater in prophecy than you. So that's really remarkable as well. So you've got this figure who's just like, the story is ostensibly about Abraham, but he takes his wife along despite her not bearing kids, which is like, easily like the standard patriarchal like responsibility of women. And then then God like straight tells him to his face, like, and you should listen to everything she says, and as Rashi says, because she's the better, greater prophet. Okay. And then that you fast forward a couple of generations, and Abraham's son Isaac is about to give the blessing of the firstborn to his older son Esau, and Yitzchak's wife. I might interchangeably use like the Hebrew and the anglicized names. I hope that doesn't throw anyone off. But Yitzchak's wife Rivka is she doesn't think that's a good idea. She thinks the blessing should go to the younger son Yaakov. And so after Yitzchak says to Esau, go, go out, something like go out into the fields, hunt me some game, like make up some nice food, the kind that I like, and then I'll give you the blessing because I'm near death. And Esau goes out instantly. Yitzchak's wife Rivka shows up. She says to Yaakov, no, listen to my voice. We're not letting him do that. What we're going to do is I'm going to slaughter a goat or two goats or something, and you're going to prepare something now, some food. We're going to prepare some food, and you're going to take that into your father, who's blind. That's plot relevant, and he's going to bless you. And like the language she uses when she's hatching this scheme is Shema Bekoli, like heed my voice. And he objects a bit, but in the end goes through with it, and like the narrative ends up following him. And so what's really interesting is like there's this movement from like the slightly earliest section of like God saying to Abraham, heed her voice, to Rivka, Abraham's daughter-in-law, using the same language in the first person, heed my voice. And it's the same root words, the Shema meaning hear or heed, and Chol meaning voice. So I think that's really compelling, and I think it's linguistic parallelism or duplication in the Bible is to be taken seriously. And so I think that's part of like what we're talking about with this parallel society. I think that's a big part of what is being explored in these early biblical tales. Like, in what ways are the women who are with the patriarchs, like pulling the strings to make the events happen that need to be happening?
I can't agree more. I think we have this underlying narrative that women were oppressed throughout history, which is true in many ways. But like, if you look at history, I mean, it does follow these parallels. Like, women were oftentimes, sometimes just as powerful as the men, but without the outward show of power. Like, you look at Alexander's mother, who he was super attached to his mom, Olympias, and she had like all these myths around her, and people would say he's just like his mother. That was constantly said about Alexander, which isn't, I just listened to a Dan Carlin episode of it, but like, people don't often say, oh, Yitzi, you're just like your mother. He's amazing.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Like,
no, that's not a common expression.
No, and that was said about him because she was so, and many great leaders throughout history, many great conquerors had like very strong relationships with their mothers. And King Henry VI was born as a like kind of a lower noble class. Like, he was kind of, nobody would have thought that he was gonna rise up to be the king when he was born. He was very much not in the running. And then his mother, who had him at 13, just spent her entire life social climbing from one person to another, like making friends with the right people, and eventually her son became king. And
wow.
It was incredible.
I love that.
Yeah, there's a YouTube documentary on the War of Roses, and it's the fourth one, Margaret. Yeah, it's amazing, and I think that I would love to see, and perhaps I should do something about this. But I'm not much of a history buff myself, but just more stories of the women, because I think it's just like, I think that's one of the reasons why Macbeth is such a captivating play for me, is because it's kind of all centered around Lady Macbeth. Like, she is his conscience in so many ways. He kills these people and he climbs up, but it's specifically because there's this dark feminine in there, because the feminine influences the man. And you could say that oftentimes the female is kind of the conscience. Like, look at vegetarians, right? Most vegetarians probably started off as women in society, and then the men kind of flock to whatever the women are doing, and then they're a
And
male.
now it's a movement.
Yeah, now it's a movement. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
100%. 100%. Also within Macbeth, you have the the three witches who are the ones who give the quest to begin with.
Yeah.
And there's this whole extra scene that's like often cut in modern productions where like Hecate, like the leader of the witches, like this shows up and does this whole monologue to them.
mm,
Yeah, so there's a lot going on there. So Lahavdil, there's this really interesting bit in the Talmud about Korach. You know Korach?
No.
Korach? He's this dude who has this big like what the closest thing to a the closest thing to a War of the Roses, I guess, in the Torah itself. Like he's this guy who's also from like the tribe of Levi, who's like very like of a very similar like family branch to Moses himself, and he shows up and like tries undermining like Moses' leadership and Aaron's command of the high priesthood. And so there's this really powerful drama and eventually like it culminates like there's this back and forth, and it culminates in this really incredible scene where I think on God's command, like Aaron brings, and maybe his sons bring like fire pans with incense in them, and Korach and his followers bring fire pans with incense in them, and like at this preordained time, like this fire comes down from heaven and consumes Aaron's, like thus indicating like that God is into his offering and like he chooses him, and at the same time the earth splits open and Korach and his followers descend, and that's it. Yeah. So then that's like the story in the actual Torah. I don't think like mentions women explicitly at all, as I recall. However, there's this really interesting thing that the rabbis pull out where they're like talking about, where they say, well, look, if you look at the beginning of the dispute, it has like it lists Korach by name and I think three other guys explicitly, like names them, and a bunch of other people. They showed up with this complaint against Moses and Aaron. And then like towards the end of the story, it says something like, and Korach and these two guys and his complainants showed up. Like, wait a minute, what about this guy? Why did they mention him here but not here? And like there's this rabbinic homily, there's a story that his wife saw what he was up to and was like, this isn't a good idea. This not. And so like in advance of like they were all scheduled to show up and like bring out their fire pans and do the big public defiance thing at a certain time. And ahead of that, I think she was feeding him a lot of alcohol. I think maybe even feeding him like cheese to make him thirsty or salt to make him thirsty at the same time. But I could be getting that from a different story. So feeding him a lot of alcohol, and he passed out. And then what she did is she sat at the entrance of her tent, like combing her hair. So when Korach's henchmen came to collect him, they're like, "Oh, a woman combing her hair. I can't disturb this." And so they left, and then he slept through the whole thing, and he survived.
Wow.
And yeah, and then they tell this parallel story where they're like, and on the other hand, like Korach's wife, what was her dialogue like? Like he would come home and she would say to him, "Why is it that Moses and Aaron lord themselves over you? It was not like da da da," and like she's the one who instigated him with this whole thing. Wow. So it's like, yeah, strong parallel. Now that now I'm saying out loud, strong parallel to have to with like the Macbeth thing, right? Because Macbeth's willing to leave it. Lady Macbeth's like the one who like nudges him. It's like, no, you have to take the king on, bro. You can't just let him. You're destined for more. And so like that whole Talmudic story is meant to like illustrate how, again, it's that like that female influence for good or for ill that's is really, I guess, in the driver's seat of these really big events.
That has a lot of parallels in my own life, actually. I think I'll wrap up pretty soon. It's getting kind of late, but even like Elliot's a coach, right? And when I first was with him, he was like, "Oh, I want to be a coach." And by the way, he spends like sometimes 5 or 7 hours a day just talking to people and like helping them through their stuff. And essentially, he was coaching without the money. And he was like, I just want to do this for money. I can help people learn to meditate and all that. And I had these preconceived notions before of what coaches were, and they seemed slimy to me. Like the idea of a coach was slimy, and I was like, kind of initially I was like don't do that. You know, what else have you considered? Like, and I had a Lady Macbeth in me kind of thing of like, oh, go for power. You know, what have you
Yeah.
considered being a doctor? You know, something like
Yeah.
that. But it's like actually probably my place as a woman is to encourage him to follow his higher self or his path set out by God, you might say, or just his whatever his passion are, and also to do the right thing, for him to do the right thing, and not so much to strive for absolute for power or for social climbing, which I think is a pitfall that we can fall into sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, I think I might wrap up there. It's nearly 9 p.m. Oh, it is 9
Gee.
p.m.
Good innings.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. This was so much fun. This is great.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it.
It's been 2 hours and 40 minutes. I can't believe it. You're a very good talk. It's very easy to talk to you.
Thank you. Likewise.
All right. Will you be releasing a new episode of your podcast soon? Do you think?
Yeah, actually, I took a big break over the COVID thing because I do mine in person. That's a thing I try and just abide by. But I've recorded 3 new episodes, and hopefully we're
Season 2.
Yeah, season 2.
All right. Yitzi Tuvel, and that is Building Jerusalem.
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. I'll talk to you soon. Talk to you later. God willing.
God willing. Thanks.